Hi, my name is April Rush, and I'm on the board of the Shiloh Museum of Ozark History. Have you guys all been there? Yes, yes, yes. Well, I'm actually the president, so that's really exciting for me. I got involved with the board. My employer very strongly encourages their employees to become involved in the community. I'll be honest, I tried several different things before I found the museum. I did a lot of different stuff before I found a good fit. One of my coworkers was on the board. I couldn't be on it anymore for time reasons, and he suggested I join, and so I applied. It was an application process that does, because the museum is a department of the city of Springdale, so the museum board had to determine if I was a good candidate, and then it also had to be approved by the city council. So one of the things that struck out my very first, and I had never been on a board before, so I had no experience. I joined the board about 4 years ago. The director of the museum, Alan Lord, provided all of the board members with a new board member packet. And of course that contained things about the history of the museum and its goals and missions and that things. But the one thing I remember the most about that board packet was expectations. And in there it said that they expect board members, one, to show up to meetings. I mean, we have the set board meeting. It's the second Thursday of every month. It's usually an hour and a half or so. And, you know, if you're going to be on the board, you need to come to the meetings. And you've always heard that thing, showing up is half the battle. Well, it is. The second part is being prepared. You know, if you're going to come to a meeting as a board member, you should be prepared. And then the third thing is to participate. You can't just go to a meeting and sit there and not be prepared. And if you are prepared, you should participate and share and you know, help other people make decisions. So one of the things as the president of the board we do is we have anywhere from 13 to 17 board members, kind of keeping them all engaged and focused on a certain project is not always easy. Sometimes it's herding cats, as you've probably heard that expression before. Everybody has different things or ways to proceed with things, but that's part of the thing. The other thing, you know, it's a lot of encouragement, but the other thing I try to do as the president of the board is I try to lead by example. I come to the meetings. I come to all the meetings I can. I do prepare and I participate. I lead the meetings, and I have to as the president. But one of the things I try never to do is I try never to ask the members of my board to do something I wouldn't be willing to do myself. And I'm setting examples, and so I have high expectations for the people on my board because I have high expectations for myself. So that, I think, helps, and I think it helps as a leadership position to have those high standards. So I know I only have a few minutes, but I'll tell you one of the projects we're working on. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Oddfellows building. It used to be called the old Oddfellows building on Huntsville Road. It's a 2-story white building. It's old. So it was actually built in 1871, and the Oddfellows gave it to the museum 10 or 15 years ago because the Oddfellows were not making good use of it. Their membership had dwindled, but they didn't want to see the building go away. I mean, it's the oldest building in this area. It's either as old or older than Old Main. You know, 1871 is a long time ago for a building to stand, and it's a wooden structure, so to still be here after all that time is pretty cool. But part of the deal was, and if the museum was going to take that building, we made a commitment that we were going to rehabilitate the building and kind of bring it back to use and not let it sit idle and continue to deteriorate. So one of the projects, as the president, I really felt the board needed to focus on was getting that building back into shape and to use it. So we had to research how much it was going to cost to rehabilitate the museum, or the Shiloh, we call it the Shiloh Meeting Hall now, but to rehabilitate that building, but to keep it true to historical standards. We are a history museum, so we just didn't want to gut it and make it really cool and fancy. We wanted to respect its heritage and some of the historical value that it has. So, you know, how are you going to do that? Who's going to do that? So we had to put the job out for bids, and we went through the whole bid process. And then, of course, when you find out how much it costs, then you got to get the money for it. So we had to raise funds. Now, the museum is a department of the city, so we were hopeful that the city would help with that, and they graciously did. The city council, after we presented information to them, agreed to foot the bill for half of it, which was $500,000, was just the half that the city put in. And that's your taxpayers' money, that's your parents' money, that's your money. So we have to be very diligent in how we spend that. But that wasn't enough to get the building done. We have another $500,000 that we had to raise. We were able to get some grants for it. And we're really hopeful we can open that building in the I don't know, late spring, early summer, if all goes well. And so we're really excited to bring that building. It was a gathering place in the late 1800s and the 1900s, and so we hope to make it another gathering place for the public again real soon. As far as how much time I spend on the board, I mean, we have the board meetings, but it's never enough time. You know, I could always spend more time doing things for the museum. But I'll tell you, it's not hard, and I don't see it as a chore or a burden because it's something I really enjoy. If it was something I didn't find enjoyment out of, it would be much more of a burden. So I can't put a number because some weeks it's 1 hour, and some weeks it's 5 hours, and some weeks it's not at all. But so that's my little 5-minute spiel, and I'm happy to be on the board of the museum. So I guess, Kevin, you'll talk now?
Yeah, so Kevin will talk for a little bit, and then you guys can ask questions either one of them.
So thank you all for being here this evening. My name's Kevin Parsley. I'm the chairman of the Planning Commission for Springdale. And I was just looking up. I couldn't remember if we are 4 or 6 year terms. I know my term is up in January, so hopefully that does get renewed. This is an appointed position by the mayor. It does have to be The mayor does have to come before the city council, and the city council actually has to approve those appointments. And both the members of the planning commission and also the chairman of the planning commission as well. But there's a couple of us that our terms are up at the end of January. So position that I joined the planning commission about 4 years ago. And really the big reason why I wanted to join was to get more involved and engaged as far as what was going on with the city and give my part back to the city. It is a paid position as far as the appointed position, big dollars on that. I think I get a total of about $275 a month on the whole thing on that, but that is all public record as far as these types of positions on that. So appointed positions, I do enjoy that because I don't have to run as far as any type of an elected type of process on there. So it's been really rewarding as far as being on the Planning Commission. There's been a lot that's happened in the city of Springdale. Before I go there on that, there are 9 members of the Planning Commission, including myself as far as the chairman. So if we do get to a tie type of vote, many times I will break that tie. There are occasions that we don't have all the planning commissioners that do show up. And so if we have an even vote, and how I vote on that whole piece actually is a tie-breaking vote on that as well. So just a couple of different things as far as due process with the Planning Commission meetings. We do meet the first Tuesday of every month, and then we also do have work sessions. And work sessions is a good opportunity for us to review as far as master street plans, master land plans. We also work as far as the trail system as well. So that's part of our jurisdiction of responsibility. So, and that's been a big part as far as Springdale in the last couple of years of the trail system. So thanks to the Walton family and some grants and so forth that we get to go forward with that. Kind of the process of our Planning Commission meetings, we do open as far as, and this is a personal thing. I mean, not all planning commissions start this way. I think it's very important as far as starting with our Pledge of Allegiance and also an invocation, a prayer that we do start. But that is really at the discretion of the chairman of the Planning Commission as far as how we do conduct those meetings. Those are considered what are pre-meeting type of events. We do also start off with a roll call. And that puts on record as far as who is attendance at the Planning Commission meetings. And then we have the approval of the minutes. And the minutes are from the previous month. It's really important. You'll always hear me as far as when we're doing things and I ask if there's any comments from the audience. They always have to come up here and state their name and address because we do record every word that is put into those. And that's really important for us for historical purposes on that, but also for legal purposes. If there was something that was contested, all of those transcripts from those planning commission meetings can be brought to a court of law. And that has happened, that they do have to take those things forward with that whole piece. So we do approval of the minutes. It's important for us before each of the meetings. Preparation is critical, that we will get our packets about a week in advance. And we will review as far as the minutes from the previous meeting. If there's any corrections, that's the time that we do that. And then I'll take a vote as far as approval on that, as far as the adoption of minutes. And then we get into the meat of the actual planning commission meetings. And that's where we'll have large-scale developments. There might be tabled items from the previous meeting that we do address those. And then there's conditional uses and things of that nature as well. I know you guys have a simulation that you'll probably be going through, which I think will really help you understand as far as the ins and outs as far as what we do with the planning commission. But the preparation that we have for it, we get our packets, like I said, about a week in advance. The good news is that everything is on these devices now, our iPads. Previously, I would have delivered to the front door a nice big packet of printed materials on that. Have you guys ever seen blueprints as far as big old packets? They're usually and usually about 40 pages in length. Imagine getting about 5 or 6 of those and having to go through and review all of those prior to the meetings. Not only do we have to go through all of those, but we also do have to visit the locations of the property as well. It's important for us to go and see what we're actually voting on and hearing before our citizens of the city in that as well. So lots of preparation that we do, just like you guys as well. And also preparation as far as for our work sessions. We have had the opportunity on work sessions to do bus tours. Some of the things that we looked at the water departments and understanding some of the big projects that they're doing. We also went to areas of the city that have been opportunities where we've had multiple violations that have occurred, and how do we handle those. So it helps us as far as better educating about what's going on with the city as well. I personally am feel very fortunate to be in the position that I'm in, because I think we really we take it very seriously as far as what we do. We think that we have one of the most important responsibilities for the city, because we keep the image and the visual image of the city and actually help as far as shape the future of that as well. Anything from signage to types of banners to different types of developments, what can go next to each other, noise ordinances, you name it. I mean, I was on the planning commission. You guys went to school. You go to School of Innovations. We approved those, and we actually have some coming up, I think, next year as far as some expansions for the School of Innovations that'll be coming forward. And then some of the most recent that was really a lot of fun for us to be able to do. We had the ballpark district overlay plan. We got to approve that, and because of that, you've seen things like the new Sam's Club go in. They were actually the first to adopt our new guidelines that we have as far as the ordinances that we have within the ballpark district. And then coming up in January, we obviously have the Arkansas Children's Hospital as well. Those were really, really important and exciting initiatives that we were able to work on. And then the other one that was really a lot of fun, and then are they going to get to go tomorrow to the grand opening of the Tyson or anything? It's middle of the day? Well, they can get out of school for that one, no. But we very exciting event happening tomorrow, and that is the grand opening of the original Tyson headquarters. That was a very important project that was a part of our downtown overlay district plan that we put in place as well. So you guys have probably seen how different downtown Springdale is going to look based off of what Tyson is putting there. The streetscape, all of those things on it. You probably haven't paid much attention to it, but if you look as far as the streetscape going down through there, mixed emotions. Some people say, well, I can't go through downtown Springdale as fast as I used to. Well, that's good. We don't want people to, it's not to be a pass-through. It's actually meant to be a destination. So we've actually narrowed the streets to make it more conducive to foot traffic within the city, and especially in the downtown area. So those are all the different things that we have as far as all of what we want to do as far as the Planning Commission. It is a appointed position, like I said. You do go through an application process, and it is appointed by the mayor. So in the future, if that is something that you guys do have interest, we love to be able to bring in new planning commission members on it. One of our members of the planning commission is actually a student and in engineering. And so it's been great for him to learn, especially as an engineering student, what goes on as far as getting things approved from the city. Okay? So I'll stop there because you probably have questions. So.
All right, so I'm going to open it up for questions. We have about 5 minutes. Do you have questions for either Kevin or April?
I have a question for Kevin.
Yeah.
Is that okay? So I so appreciate that you visit the sites and really to get a good feel and understand what's being requested or asked or what the issue is.
Mm-hmm.
That must take a lot of time. And you must and you have a full-time job, is that correct?
I do. I do have a full-time job. This is really more of a kind of a volunteer piece that I do accomplish on it, but it's the dedication that I have because I want to be able to get back to my city in that regard. But yeah, I mean, on the weekends is typically right before the first Tuesday. I'll go out and visit some of the locations over the weekend. Some locations it's just driving by. Some of them I actually need to go and talk to the property owner. And so we'll obviously have a badge, and we do approach them as far as saying, hey, this is coming up. Just wanted to see this, asking it some questions that you might have as well. Yep. Any questions?
Wow, I think it's the first time they haven't had any questions. I guess you guys pretty much covered everything. Okay.
I do. I was going to say, because I think you guys are supposed to attend a planning commission meeting. Okay. I never really know in advance until sometimes I'll come up here and sign papers that that I need to be able to do as far as the chairman. And they'll somewhat give me notice, but many times I don't know until the week before. And that becomes interesting as well because there's many citizens that know about what's coming on before the planning commission before we know. And so I'll get emails, phone calls, concerns, excitement, whatever it might be. I think the biggest question I always get, when are we getting a Chick-fil-A? It's not up to the planning commission to decide, do we get a Chick-fil-A or not? It's on that. And it wasn't up to the planning commission to make the decision for them to not go where they were at as far as at Slim Chickens, where that is going in that whole piece of that. So we're just really there to help make sure that they are within compliance of all the city guidelines and so forth as they go forward with it. We're always in a position, I would tell you this as well, we always like to take a stance of educating and doing what we can to make things happen. We're not there as far as to resist things from happening. And I think that's an important aspect that people need to understand, and you know, because not all planning commissions are that way. Some planning commissions actually try to resist certain types of development, and that's not our purpose here at all. We actually encourage, we're excited about helping people with their, their business dreams that they have to make that a reality. And there's many times that they just don't know. And so I take it upon myself to help as far as educating the way we can. The one thing we won't do is we won't build and design in the sessions on that whole piece. That's what the planning department is there to help with in preparation of that as well. So, but a lot of great developments that have come to Springdale, and a lot more that I think are going to come before us. So I encourage you guys, if you haven't looked at the downtown area in a lens from our perspective, take a look at it. Take a look at the streetscapes and how things are changing and what we're doing different. And then also, take a chance with Children's Hospital to see the uniqueness that that's going to bring as far as to the community as well. But I was going to tell you, as far as the Planning Commission meeting, I would come to the one in December because it's end of the year can be interesting. It can go one way or the other. It can be a really fast one and we move through it, or it can be one that has a lot of uniqueness and opportunities that we do go through on that. So, okay. Thank y'all. Appreciate it.
So thank you so much, Kevin. Thank you so much, April, for taking time to talk about your board and commission. So as Kevin mentioned, you guys can take a seat, grab some food if you'd like.
I was gonna tell you, I wish I could stick around to see you go through what some of your simulations, because you're gonna get challenged on that. Trust me.
Good afternoon, good evening. My name is Jennifer Price, and I'm the election coordinator for Washington County. With me is Becky Llewellyn. She is the county clerk in Washington County, and then Lynn Hodge, who is one of our programmers in our office. So I'm going to walk through the election process for you, what the Election Commission is, and just talk about what you can expect on election day, what offices are up for election, and what type of elections that we have. So if you'll go to the So the Election Commission is based on the majority party that holds the constitutional offices in the state of Arkansas. So those constitutional offices are governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, attorney general, state treasurer, auditor, and land commissioner. In 2014, for the first time in a very long time in Arkansas history, all the offices were held by Republicans. So this meant that our election commission went from being a 3-member with 2 Democrats and 1 Republican to 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat. So the election commission oversees the whole election process, and the commissioners are appointed by their parties. So in 2014, we saw a turnover in the election commissioners for the state of Arkansas. We're required to follow all federal and state election laws. Some of those are that you have to be the age of 18, registered in the county that you're voting on, and then there are some particular laws that pertain to the state, which would be voter ID laws. Those are not always federal laws. So our job is to make sure that all of those laws, both federal and state laws, are followed when the election is set up. Some election commissions have a coordinator, which is what my job is. Basically, I oversee the administrative side and make sure that the election process runs smoothly. Smaller counties, just the election commission themselves, with the help of the county clerk, typically make sure that that election process goes smoothly in that county. So we have 75 counties with 75 election commissions, but that doesn't mean that each county does it the same way across the state. The one main thing is, though, is that each election commission and county clerk make sure that their election follows federal and state guidelines. So what type of elections are there? So the general election. That election is held every even year. So next year in 2018, we'll have a general election, and that will be for the state constitutional offices. 2 years after that, we'll have another presidential year. So that election for the state offices and Senate and federal offices is mandated by the Constitution of the United States. So that means that that election is always held the first Tuesday following the first Monday in November. Our state laws are different when it comes to special elections in the state of Arkansas. So our state laws set out that a special election has to be held the second Tuesday of the month, with some variances for the school election, which used to be held the third Tuesday of the month. So there could possibly be different dates for elections. They don't always fall on the same Tuesday. So it's really important when you become old enough to vote. How old are you guys, by the way? 16? Okay. So when you turn 17 and a half, you can register to vote. And then once you're able to vote, when you turn 18, that gets you eligible to vote as soon as you turn 18. Start looking, reading your local newspapers, following the news, and find out when there are elections, because there's not just that big federal presidential elections. There's all sorts of elections that happen in your county and in your state that impact you more than maybe the presidential election might actually impact you. We also have a preferential primary, which means that the parties will select their candidates who they're going to run in the general election. So in 2016, we had the big, what they called the SEC primary, which meant that all the southern states held their primary on the same date. And during that time, Republican parties and the Democratic parties chose their candidates for president to go on the presidential ballot for the general election. So we'll still hold a president or a primary in 2018, but this time it will be for Republican candidates for governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, but it won't be for the presidential candidates. That won't be until 2020. We have an annual school election. So most people don't realize that every single year, school board members are elected and the school millage gets voted on for that school district. This election typically had been held in September, but in the 2017, this year, they changed that date so that now it will be held either with the primary in May or with the general election. So your school board members typically, determine where your school zones are. All your local things that you see that go on with the school district and the millage, how that school money is spent. That election gets one of our least amount of voter turnouts when it was held separately, but your taxes go more to a school than any other part that you pay locally. Yet most people don't participate in the school board election. So it's just something to think about when you're thinking about voting. Don't just think president. Think all the way down to every elected office that there is. Then special elections. Special elections are when maybe there's a vacancy in an office and they can't appoint someone, so they hold a special election. Or a school needs to raise the millage to build a new school, but they need to do it before their annual school election. Or a city needs to raise a bond. I think the city of Springdale itself is looking to have a special election maybe in February or March. And so they'll hold that at a different time than the general or the primary because they need that funding in a particular time frame rather than waiting until November or May. So those are your different types of elections that you might have. And your types of offices. So president, obviously, that's the one gets the most news coverage. Every 4 years, 2016 was our last presidential election here in Arkansas. And for Washington County, we had the highest voter turnout we've ever had with over 80,000 votes cast for the presidential election year. Then U.S. Congress, that's your House of Representatives. So they're elected every 2 years. U.S. Senate, elected every 6 years. This year in 2018, there will be no U.S. Senate races on the ballot. So they won't be on there until 2020. And then state constitutional offices, they're for every 4 years. So the governor is elected for a 4-year term. I guess when they set up the Constitution, they set it to where it's opposite so that in those opposite years, you run president, and then the next year you'll run state constitutional. Then you have state representatives and state senators. So much like you have a federal system set up with senators and House of Representatives, our state government works the same way. We elect state representatives who run every 2 years, and then state senators who serve a little bit longer term. But our state government is set up, and it mimics, in a lot of ways, the federal government. And then county offices, so that would be your county judge, your county clerk, your circuit clerk, assessor, county treasurers. Those all, up until 2016, were 2-year terms. And then in 2016, there was a constitutional amendment passed, and now, starting in 2018, they will be elected to a 4-year term. And then you have municipal offices. So that would be your mayor, your alderman. All of those positions are elected. Depending on the size of the city, either a mayor runs for a 4-year term or a 6-year term. Your city council members may run for 2 or 4-year terms. That is sometimes depending on each city and how they're set up. Do you want to? Okay. So when you do decide to run for office, this isn't on the slide, so you will actually file to run for office, and that's actually done in the county clerk's office. One of the things about filing, there's a lot of paperwork that goes with filing for office, and so it's really, really important that as a candidate, you look through that paperwork and you fill it out correctly and turn in all the forms correctly. A lot of times when people are looking to find something on a particular candidate, one thing that they will pick on will be they didn't file their paperwork in a timely manner. They failed to file a report that said that they had earned or gained this much money through donations. The other part, when you're filing for office, you also have to put on there how your name will appear on the ballot. When we get the ballot information from the county clerk's office, that's how we will put your name on the ballot. So if it has been spelled wrong, if you fill out the paperwork, or you wanted something, if you, let's say you were a city council member and you wanted to say council member John Doe, that's how I'm running for office. But if you failed to put council member on there, we don't put it on the ballot. So that paperwork that you fill out for running for office, is very important that you make sure that you go through all the steps, follow all the guidelines, collect all the signatures that you have to collect, and turn it in on time. The filing period for the primary election will start February 22nd and run to March 1st, but it ends at noon, which means that if you come in at 12:01, your name won't appear on the ballot. So when they say it must be turned in at a particular time, there is no grace period. You know, sometimes when you're a student and you turn in a paper, your professor, your teacher will say, okay, you can turn it in late. Filing for office, there is no turning it in late, okay? So when that says noon, 12:01, your name will not appear on the ballot. So voter turnout. That's one of the things we always look at when we're prepping in our office. That tells us what we need to do to prepare for the ballot and prepare for poll workers, voters, voting locations. A general election ballot in 2014, 47% voter turnout. In 2016, we had 65% voter turnout. The difference between the years, 2016 was presidential, 2014 was for governor's race. So the interest in elections always usually is dependent on who's running for office. And most people turn out for the presidential year, but they don't turn out in a non-presidential year. Yet your governor, your city council members, you know, the planning board that was in here earlier talking, they're appointed by a mayor who's elected in maybe an off year that voters don't turn out to vote for. So that impacts you on a daily basis, where sometimes maybe a presidential race doesn't impact you quite as much as a city council member or a school board member. Preferential primary. So this is where the numbers really drop. So 2014, we had a 17% voter turnout. So this is where the parties are choosing who's going to run for office. 2016, we had a 39% voter turnout. That was a presidential, and once again, that was what they were calling the SEC primary. So it was talked about on the news constantly. You know, all these southern states getting together all at once, voting to make sure, you know, that their votes counted in determining who was the presidential candidate that year. And then in 2018, our primary will be in May 22nd. And we also have what's called an open primary system. So an open primary system means that on election day, if you're registered to vote and you show up at the polls, we're going to ask you, what type of ballot do you want? Do you want a Democratic ballot with Democratic candidates? Do you want a Republican ballot with Republican candidates, or do you want a nonpartisan judicial ballot which holds the judges, like district judges, our state Supreme Court? Those are nonpartisan. So on election day, you have that option to choose. Now, some states have closed primaries, which means that you would have had to register to be a Democrat or a Republican before the election. And so when you go in, they already know this person is a registered Democrat, so they receive a Democratic ballot, okay? So we still have what's called an open primary system, which lets you choose on election day. When you register to vote, you have the option to register as a Republican, a Democrat, a Libertarian, Green Party, or optional. Most people in Washington County are registered as optional because you don't have to declare a party to actually vote in the primary system, okay? So then our annual school board. This year, actually in 2018, we're already prepping. Our office is already preparing for the election in May. So 2018, the school districts will determine whether they want to hold their election in May or if they want to hold their election in November with the primary or with the general election. Most school districts have already indicated that they will hold their election in May. So all these school districts, Elkins, Farmington, Fayetteville, Greenland, Lincoln, Prairie Grove, Springdale, West Fork, all their candidates will now appear on a primary ballot. So typically, voter turnout for a school election is less than 5%. So there will be a lot of people who come to vote, that 17% that we're hoping for. We really hope for a greater percent, but there will actually be a lot of people that show up for Election Day in May who will see school board candidates that they've never seen before because they haven't participated in school board elections. So this will be new for the voters in Washington County, actually across the state. Special elections. This is where voter turnout gets even lower. So City of Springdale had a special election August 14th, 2012. It was a bond issue. I think street improvement, park, recreational, and fire department feels like that's kind of what the same bond issue that they're looking to hold a special election in February of next year too. There are 22,889 registered voters at the time in the city of Springdale. Only less than 2,000 votes were cast for that election. That's 8.58% voter turnout. So that's a really low percentage of people who are determining how the city spends their money. So every election accounts, you know, even if you think, I don't mind if it goes up, you know, or I do mind, you should come and vote because every vote counts. So this is typical of a special election is the low voter turnout. Like I said, the highest voter turnout we ever see is for a presidential election because the hype's there. People, you know, see it on the news constantly, and they know and they're aware. And so you need to make sure that you stay aware. Watch the news, read a newspaper, learn when the special elections are. We're required by law to announce these special elections in the newspaper. You know, we post things on our media sites. The city council does a nice job of posting everything. So just make sure that you're aware of when an election is, because your vote does count. So I pulled up some statistics from previous elections just to kind of show you how close an election can be. So in 2012, we had an alderman race in Elm Springs where the city council member won by 3 votes. In 2012, it was 6 votes for a mayor of West Fork. And these were general elections when you had large voter turnout. And the school election now, where you have less of a voter turnout, but one vote was what made the difference between that candidate sitting on the school board and not sitting on the school board. And then in Fayetteville, we had a 2-vote difference. So to say that your vote doesn't count, it does. You know, for these candidates, if 2 more people, 3 more people had showed up to vote, it would have changed the outcome of that election. So always know that your vote does count. Maybe you don't see that number in the big presidential election because the numbers are so high, but when you get down into these smaller local elections, you see that your vote counts. So, who can register to vote? Am I going overtime? Am I okay? Okay. Who can register to vote? So you have to be a citizen of the United States to register to vote in Arkansas, okay? You have to be 18 years old to actually vote. But the nice thing is you can go ahead and register to vote when you turn 17 and a half, so that if you turn 18 by the time the election is here, you're already registered to vote, because you have to register 30 days before an election. So let's say that you turn 18 on election day, but you had to have registered 30 days before. That means even though you were eligible to vote, you didn't get an opportunity to do that. So make sure, as soon as you turn that 17 and a half, you go ahead and register to vote. So you can vote in any elections as soon as you turn 18, okay? Now, when I say that you have to be a citizen in the United States to vote, that's for federal and state and local races here in Arkansas. But some states allow non-U.S. citizens to register to vote for city elections, because they live in the city, they pay taxes, and so they actually allow non-citizens to register to vote in municipal elections or school board elections. So that's where there are federal and state laws that determine certain things. So we follow all the federal and Arkansas state laws. So, types of voting. Absentee voting, which means that you cannot get to the polls on election day or during early voting. So that's if you're in the military and you're serving overseas, or let's say you're serving in Texas, or you are a college student and you won't be home for the election. You can register for an absentee ballot and get it mailed to you 45 days before the election, which allows you time to mail it back so that your vote will count. If you're unable to get to the polls, you can ask for an absentee ballot, and it comes to your house, and then you can return it. We have early voting. Anymore, you have 2 weeks to vote at 6 locations across Washington County, even on Saturdays, to cast a ballot before the general election. For the general election in 2016, we had close to 60% of our votes cast early, which was really nice, because that meant even though our lines were long election day, they weren't as long as they would have been. For a special election or runoff, you have 1 week to vote early. And then, of course, election day, you vote from 7:30 in the morning to 7:30 at night. And then in Washington County, you can vote at any of the 48 locations that are open on election day, which means that if I'm working in Bentonville, or I'm at school in Bentonville, and I live clear across the other side of Washington County, and I'm trying to get home before 7:30 to vote at my traditional polling place, as soon as I cross Washington County line and I see a polling place, which would be Elmdale up here, kind of close, I can go cast my vote there. I don't have to go to what used to be my traditional polling place close to my house in the precinct that I lived in. So we've strived here in Washington County to make voting more accessible to voters by offering vote centers, which allows you to go to any location to cast your ballot. And then you have your traditional election day voting. Some people like the election day voting. Okay. So we've got 126,000 registered voters in Washington County. We're the 3rd largest county in Arkansas. We have 151 precincts. 48 polling locations, 13 in the city of Fayetteville, 8 in the city of Springdale, and then 21 out in the rest of the county. And then we have over 400 voters or poll workers who work the polls on election day. What happens when you go to vote? You are now, as of 2017, required to show approved photo ID when you go in to vote. You will be required to state your name, your address, and your date of birth. You will be given a blank ballot. We have electronic marking devices now. We have new voting equipment, which is really nice and convenient for our voters. You'll cast your ballot there at the polls at a ballot box that actually calculates votes there as they're being cast. Of course, we don't release results or no results until after 7:30. Types of ID that are accepted would be an Arkansas driver's license or an Arkansas state ID, military ID, a U.S. passport, a student or employee ID of like a college, university, public assistance ID, or a voter ID card that's issued by the county clerk. That's if you have no other form of ID. You can actually go to the county clerk's office and get a photo ID made, no charge, and that would be accepted on election day. Now, Arkansas does have what we call fail-safe voting, which would be provisional voting. So if you don't have your ID on election day or you're unable to provide ID, that doesn't mean that you can't cast a ballot. If we can't look up your information on election day, let's say you registered to vote, but for some reason we can't find your information, we offer you a provisional ballot. We don't want anyone who comes in to vote leave the polling place without getting an opportunity to cast a ballot that we can't look at afterwards, and then the election commission will determine whether that vote counts or not. So if you go in and vote, don't leave. If you know that you're registered to vote, don't leave without asking for a provisional ballot. So that's one of our Arkansas laws is called fail-safe voting, which means every voter who comes to vote gets that opportunity to vote. And then election night, all of our ballot boxes and everything are sealed and brought back to the courthouse. We tabulate our votes. We have a whole process to go through where we make sure that all the votes cast on election day match the numbers in our electronic poll books. And so we don't release results until we've gone through kind of a verification process so that we don't have to wake up the next morning and tell the news media, oh my gosh, we forgot to count a polling place, or we're missing a box, or these numbers are wrong. And then 10 to 15 days after the election, it's certified, and then the candidates receive from the county clerk's office notice that they've been certified to that position or office that they hold. And that's pretty much it.
Any questions? You get a lot of information.
Let's say that you register before you're 18, what happens to your information? Because we don't have a lot of personal information on all those registration sheets. Do you just get thrown out, or?
So if you register when you're 17 and a half, is that what you're saying? So if you register before you're eligible, what does the clerk's office do with the...
Why is the registered voters in like the city of Springdale, why is it so low?
The number of registered voters in the city of Springdale, it's not as large as the city of Fayetteville. So there are about twice as many registered voters in the city of Fayetteville as there are in the city of Springdale. Of course, the city of Fayetteville has the university, so that makes up a difference. And then the city of Springdale's population is a little bit different than the other cities. You have a large population, but not everyone is a U.S. citizen.
Okay, so what's a bond issue? Because I don't know what that is.
So a bond issue is the city is asking for for money to finance parks, recreation, different things like that, streets. And so they're financing it over bonds over a long period of time. Now, this is not my expertise, but I know it's a way to finance a large amount of money without them having to pay for it the day that they accept a bid or anything like that. It'd be kind of like you financing a car kind of thing. They're
Okay.
financing over a long time period.
I just have one more question. So you mentioned all of this information about voting locations and things like that. Is there like an overall website people can access?
Yes, so we have the Washington County's website. We publish all the information that we can on that website. So you can see where the early vote locations are. You can see where the election day locations are. We usually have Google Maps attached to those, so you can find it there. We list all the candidates who are running for office. Every issue that's going to be on a ballot, we post online.
So I have a question about the preferential primary ballot. So you mentioned that Arkansas has an open primary system, and my question is, what are the benefits of a closed primary system, or what makes other places still have it?
So that gets into the political realm. So the question is, if I am running as, let's say, a Republican, do I want non-Republicans voting for me in the primary, or do I want to open it up for everyone to be able to vote? And so some states, like I said, have chosen that route of only letting Republicans vote for Republican primary candidates, but the state of Arkansas has continued to have what we call the open primary, which allows the voter on election day, which means that depending on the year, maybe let's say in 2014 you took a Democratic ballot, but in 2016 you might want to take a Republican ballot. You don't have to declare a party to be able to participate in the political process.
And one more question with that. Once you declare, so in other states, once you declare yourself like a registered Democrat, can you change that?
You can change it here. We have people who call in who registered to vote as a Republican or a Democrat. They want to change their registration, or they want to register as optional. Each state has their own guidelines, though, on when you can do that before an election. So those are state laws where versus a federal law. So yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Who works at the polls? And if we wanted to, could we work at the polls?
I would love to have all of you work at the polls. As long as you're 16, you can work at the polls as a volunteer. Unfortunately, I can't pay you. As soon as you turn 18, I can pay you to work at the polls. But we love having student volunteers at the polls. I work a lot with the Fayetteville School District. They have provided students for me for the past, I think, 4 election cycles that work at the polls. Springdale, sometimes I get student volunteers and sometimes I don't, but I would love to have student volunteers at the polls, absolutely.
All right, raise your hand if you are thinking about running for office one day. Okay, that's pretty cool. All right, and first, I just want to make one note that Springdale is located in Benton County and Washington County.
This is true, yeah.
Yeah. Does anyone here know if they live in Benton County? You do? Okay. So make sure you go to Benton County's website to make sure you get the correct information for your particular county. But Washington County's website is completely amazing, and I definitely recommend that you guys check it a couple times a year. Make sure you're up to date with what's going on. It's a great source of information.
You can also, when you do get registered to vote, there's a website called Voter View that you can go to, that you can verify your voter information there on that website, and you can see a sample ballot there. It will list what your traditional polling place is, but since we do vote centers, you don't have to worry so much about that. But if you were in any doubt about whether you're registered to vote, that's a great website to go to, or you can always call the clerk's office.
All right, everybody thank Jennifer for taking time to come and talk to us today. We're going to hear from Mayor Sprouse, who is a 2-for-1 special because he's a former school board member and he's a current mayor of Springdale. And then we're going to hear from Senator Lance Eads, who was a state representative first. So he's been a state rep and now he's a senator. So without further ado, Mayor Doug Sprouse.
Thank you. Thanks. All right. I'm going to talk just briefly. How long have I got, Melissa? 15 minutes. I'm just going to talk briefly about the process of running for municipal offices, mayor specifically, and also I'll touch on the school board also, because I was also a school board member before I became mayor. Of course, Arkansas has a couple of different. I think we may have talked about this before. Different types of city governance, mayor council form, and then a city manager with a board. And most of the cities up here are mayor council form of government, and that's I think Siloam is an exception to that. But in a mayor council form of government, the mayor is the chief administrator for the city. The filing for mayor, I mean, people will announce that their intentions to run long before they have to actually file. So I know when I ran, we had 6, including me. We had an open seat. Mayor Van Hoos was not running again for re-election, so we had an open seat. We had 6 candidates that actually filed. We had 7 that were talking about it, but one did not file. And filing date was in August. Don't remember what the date was, but it's once a candidate files in August, then they're in. They're going to be on the ballot. And then we in Arkansas, back when I was elected, if you had several people in a race, more than 2, the candidate still had to get 50% plus 1 in order to be elected. So that caused a lot of runoffs, and in my race there was a runoff. That has changed a little bit. Now the legislature changed the law so that if you have more than 2 candidates in a race and the leading candidate gets at least 40% of the vote and is at least 20% ahead of the nearest vote getter, then it won't go to a runoff. They'll actually be able to. You won't have a runoff. And one of our council races, Jim, was it Rick Evans that that avoided a runoff? I know Jennifer said we were the first ones up here that actually used that new, were affected by that new law. And I think it was Rick Evans who is going to be mentoring. He had over 40% of the vote, and he beat his nearest challenger by more than 20 percentage points. I don't know what else to say. 4-year terms, and I've just started my 3rd 4-year term. You still have to go down and get your name on the ballot, even if you're unopposed, and then your name will be on the ballot. So that's still have to do that. You also have to, every year we have to fill out a financial disclosure form. Just it's a law, and some things like that you've got to keep up with. The school board is different in Springdale. Well, let me say this too, even though it doesn't affect mayor so much, the whole city votes for the mayor. And in Springdale, we've got 4 wards, and 2 councilmen per ward, or 2 council members per ward. I'm getting used to that. 2 council members per ward, and they, but even though they are representing a specific ward, the entire city, we vote citywide. So everybody in the city will vote for that candidate, not just the folks that live in that ward. School board is a little different. When I got into the school board, when I was actually appointed first. there was an opening on the school board, and they took basically resumes from interested people, and I I'd never really thought about running for anything, and I was probably been in my, I guess I'd have been in my early 40s then. But I had kids, 3 kids in Springdale schools, and they, my name was chosen. But when you fill an appointed spot, you're only there until the next election. Then you've got to run, whether that term was expired or not. You've got to run for that spot. But something interesting happened in Springdale not long after I got on the school board, when we had the well, I guess it was the 2000 census, because I went on the school board in 99. And during the 2000 census, we passed a certain threshold of minority population, certain percentage of minority population. So when that happened, then by state law, Springdale School District had to go to zoned elections. So now we've got, what do we have? We have 7 school board members, I think. I think it's 5. We have 5 zoned elections, and 2 at-large. All right. I was one of the at-large members, so the whole city voted on me as a school board member. But if I was a school board member of a zoned school board member, then only the voters in that zone would vote in my election. So, we made that switch. State law, I think, required us to. So that's a difference with school board elections. And y'all got any questions? I got a few minutes left about either. Yes. I voted for myself. I sure did. Yeah. I made sure I did. Yes, Kathy.
May I ask?
You may.
Hey, so why do you, is there an advantage in your mind to having the entire city vote for the city council members instead of just by ward?
Personally, I like it better. I think it's important, and I think our council will agree. And you'll have an opportunity to talk with some of them as your mentors. But I really believe that a council member, they're concerned for the whole city, not just the area around where they live. And I think we could get into some. We seem to function very well as a council. And I think zoned elections or elections by ward only could possibly hurt that, because a council member, surely not any of them we've got now, but I could see where if a council member were only elected by their ward, then they could be pretty disinterested about what goes on in the rest of the city. And what happens in one side of a city or one part of a city affects the whole city. So, Catherine, I like it a lot better the way we've got it. I like for the entire city to be voting on our council members, and just like they do their mayor. And I hope that never changes. I don't know why it would, but I think it's better the way it is. I think it's good to have the wards, because then you are getting people from different parts of the city. It's spread out, but I still like the whole city electing council members. Yes.
What is a runoff?
A runoff. I'm sorry. A runoff is if you have, let's say you have 3 people in a race, and one person, the leading vote getter, doesn't get at least 40% of the vote and beat the next person by at least 20%. Then you have to go to a runoff, and the runoff will be 4 weeks later. And it'll just be the 2 top vote getters, and basically it's a new deal. We've many times in council, well, in mayor, I had a runoff, and it's like a new race. It's just a shortened time frame. You've got 4 weeks. Used to be 3, I think. Was it 3? Yeah, used to be 3 back when I ran, but it's 4 weeks now. So you just kind of have to do a little mini campaign, and a runoff's tough to predict because it's difficult. It can be difficult to get folks out to vote again if there's just one race on there, and it's kind of they're tougher to predict. I'll say that. Say it that way. Yes. I think you just have to be 18, voting age, to run for office. 18. I think there's a mayor in Oklahoma somewhere that, or probably not now, but he was like 20 or something. Yeah, early 20s. Yes.
Hold on a second. Let me get. Yeah.
What is the job of the alderman, and do you have multiple aldermans?
Yes, we have. We call them council members. Okay. Some cities call them aldermen. Actually, there was legislation passed this past legislative session to officially. We had to go through. I think we had to go through all our. Wherever an alderman is mentioned or councilman is mentioned, and change that, strike that, and change it to council person. So now, statewide, they're referred to as a council person, and we have 8 in Springdale because we've got 4 wards and 2 in each ward, and they alternate. The mayor election is every general election. Every 4 years, same as the president. And so the mayor and 4 of our council, 1 from each ward, will be elected during that general election. And then 2 years later in the off-year election, the other 4 councilmen, 1 from each ward, councilman, there we go, council persons, 1 from each ward will run for re-election.
Good evening. How's everybody doing tonight? Who here knows what a state senator is? Anybody? Okay, good. We got a few people. My name is Lance Eads. I live in Harbor Meadows. I am state senator for Springdale, the Springdale part that's in Washington County, and I also represent part of the east side of Fayetteville and go all the way out to Elkins. So my district goes all the way to the Madison County line. I spent 1 term in Little Rock in the House of Representatives, which is a 2-year term, so it's a little shorter. And then this is my first term, just started this year in the Senate, which is a 4-year term, which I like, so I don't have to run for a couple more years, so I actually get to spend a little bit of time. So senators and representatives are the legislative body of our state government. Similar to what Mayor Sprouse is, we have a governor. How many here know who the governor is in Arkansas? What's his name? Asa Hutchinson, yeah. So he's our executive branch of state government who actually runs the day-to-day operations of the government and is over all the departments, just like Mayor Sprouse is here at City Hall. The legislative body is the ones that actually make the laws. So you heard him mention several times, we had a new law that was passed. The legislature passed something that caused us to have to do something different. We are the group that passes those laws. And we just finished a session this year, went through from January through March, and we saw. How many bills do you think were filed in our 3-month session? Anybody want to take a guess? Let me tell you how many people there are first. There's 100 people in the House of Representatives and they represent each about 27,000 people. And on the Senate end of the Capitol in Little Rock, there's 35 of us in the Senate, and we represent about 89,000 people. And we can each file our bills that you want to do if you want to change a specific law or you want to make a new law related to something. So how many do you think we could see maybe in 3 months? Anybody want to guess? Not that many. Yes. Higher. Lower. 2,000. There you go. Good guess. So in a matter of 3 months, 2,000 bills were filed to change or create new laws, and which means of those, about half of them actually make it to the point where you actually have to vote on them. Now, that means you have to be able to read more than you've ever read in your whole life, because the biggest fear most legislators have is when a bill comes to the floor and you see the guy go down and talk about his bill, and then you got to push a button that says yes or no, and you've not read the bill, and you have no idea what to do. So every night when you go home, we would get a calendar during session that says these are the bills that are going to be on the floor that we're going to be voting on tomorrow. So you read and you read and you read, and you make phone calls to people back here in Springdale, and you talk to business owners and community members and say, here's a bill that's going to impact you in some way, and here's what it's going to do. Tell me what you think. Is this going to be good? Is this going to be bad? Is this going to hurt your business? Is it going to help your business? What do you think? So you try to get impressions from as many different people as possible, because then if it passes through the Senate, it passes to the House, it goes to the governor's desk, he signs it, it becomes what? Anybody? Law. It becomes the law of the state of Arkansas. And so then it affects all of us. So every other year we go through a session on that, and we want to make sure we get things right before they get out and become law. Because occasionally, sometimes things do get through, and there's a little line in there that people weren't aware of, or something that somebody hadn't planned for. We use the term unintended consequences that happen occasionally, and then you have to go back in and make changes to it again the next time. Now, I mentioned January through March is where we actually, every other year is where we're actually making the laws here in Arkansas. So the rest of the time, we serve on a variety of different committees throughout the years in between times when we're actually making laws. So January through March, I was at the Capitol from Monday morning till Thursday night, and then I would get to actually come home, which is kind of tough on your family sometimes to be away that much. But the rest of the year, we're only down there when our committees, specific committees meet. And I serve on probably 4 or 5 different committees that do everything from manage audits of municipalities, which is, I'm on the Legislative Audit Committee, also schools and things like that. Also, we have a variety of other committees that meet interspersed throughout this time. So anybody have any questions about what we do on a day-to-day basis?
What does your normal day look like?
Let me give you an example while we're in session, which is kind of our busy time. We go in, the first thing that meets in the morning is the Budget Committee. They meet at like 7:30, between 7:30 and 8 o'clock, and they'll meet for an hour, hour and a half to kind of plan out what kind of things the departments are going to need in their budgets for the next 2 years. They try to do a 2-year budget cycle. And then we go into our regular committees, and I serve on the Public Health Committee and City County Local, which impacts municipal laws. So I work a lot with Mayor Sprouse and our city council and those kinds of things. And they meet in the mornings at 10 o'clock, usually from 10 to noon. We'll have a few minutes to go grab us a quick bite of lunch. And then after lunch, we come into what we call a full session in the afternoon. Early in our session, that can be something fairly short. We may have 10 or 12 bills that have gotten through the process to where we vote on them that afternoon. Later, as they kind of build up as we get towards the end, and as it happens every time. People wait till the very end a lot of times there's a deadline that you can file your bill on, and then everybody's trying to get their bills through the system towards the end. So there was some days that we would start at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and they would actually bring in dinner for us, give us a few minutes to stop and grab a bite to eat, and then we'd go back in and still be voting on bills 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. And there's been a few times I've heard people go and say it till 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning voting on bills. So as you can see, that 3 months is a real harried pace all the way to the end. And by the time you get to the end of it, everybody's just kind of worn out.
So why did they do it through the 3 months and not a yearly type of cycle of?
It's the way our Constitution is set up is that our legislature just meets once every other year, and they have a certain number of days that you're allowed to have the session go to, and then through a 2/3 vote, oftentimes then we have to vote to extend that, to make it longer if we can't get finished with the things we need to get done. Now, there have been times where they've gone into April and May and longer if there was something they just couldn't get finished that really needed to happen, and they've come to an impasse and are still arguing back and forth. Sometimes they can make that even last longer.
Who can bring a bill to you guys?
Anybody can.
Anybody
Absolutely. I have people that are business owners bring me bills sometimes. I've had councilmen bring me bills. Friends that live in my neighborhood say, I have an idea of something we have a problem with we need to look at. Sometimes it comes from associations or church groups, or it can come from just anybody in the community sometimes has an idea of something that we need to improve. So that's a great question.
All right, we'll take 2 more questions.
So, from what I understand, you have a lot of responsibilities. And one thing I was wondering is, running for office is one thing that I want to explore once I get older. So, I was wondering if you can give me like a quick elevator pitch. So, what you want to get accomplished in your position and what issue or topic you care the most about.
Okay. I don't know if I could probably narrow it down to one specific thing, but I've spent probably 20 years working in a couple different industries here in Springdale, and they've all been related to working with our businesses in the community. So my goal getting into the legislature was to see, as you can imagine, Northwest Arkansas is the engine that drives the state of Arkansas this time. If you take away Northwest Arkansas, Arkansas comes to a stop. So I want to do everything I can to help keep pushing ideas and laws forward that help us continue to keep being successful in our region, do everything I can to try not to make sure we put up some kind of impediment that slows that down, because hopefully then more jobs are created, the better opportunities for all of us, which means better opportunities for you guys when you get out of school and get into the workplace as well. Yes, sir.
Yes. Do senators have like local offices when they're not in Little Rock?
No, that's a good question, though. We are not a full-time legislature. So most of them don't have an office here locally, but we do have some staff in Little Rock that can help us with some of the things that just have to get done on a regular basis, sending out letters to constituents, or if there's somebody who has a problem with a particular department that needs some help with navigating something like at DHS or the courts or something like that, we have a staff that we kind of all share down there that we can work with full time. But most senators have another job here locally that they do, that they can be reached at to be able to answer questions and help people with that as well. So, good questions.
All right, thank you so much, Senator Eads.
Thank you, guys.